I really don't recommend watching television news. I hate to say this as someone who was in TV for nearly 25 years. But I just feel that television doesn't really add anything to your news experience.
And when leaders behave in an unpredictable manner, what becomes harder for journalists who are also learning from you to verify? Is it the facts, the intent, or the consequences?
I think facts matter the most. And I think what I admire a lot about the American media, for all its faults and everything else, is that they're not afraid to call their president a liar. Well, I was there when this whole Nirbhaya gang rape happened in Delhi. I had never till then seen any story of sexual assault make such huge headlines.
What do you think was different? Hi, I'm Vamika, and this is a cup of context. The context we're exploring today is the ethics that comes into journalism. The idea is not to talk about ethics where you think about bias and political neutrality, but about how it fits into procedure. The way we deliver news is changing, social media is changing, and so speed is currency. For that, it's really important for the ethics of procedure to be discussed within journalism. There's nobody better to answer these questions about how do you know what you know, when do you publish when certainty is impossible, and what obligations do journalists owe to the public when speed is currency. Ms. Nidhi Razdan has over 21 experience with NDTV as the senior editor, and she's also been their main anchor for just as long. She's also the director of communications at IILM. Thank you for joining me today, ma'am. There's no person better I could think of to talk about what I want to today.
Thank you so much, but don't call me ma'am, please. You remind me of my age. Please
I'm going
call
to
me
try.
Nidhi.
I'm going to try really hard. Okay. So when we talk about ethics in journalism, we usually talk about bias and neutrality and political standing. But there's something that goes behind that, right? There's a procedural ethics that comes into it. And since journalism is fast changing, the way that people are telling stories, the timestamps with which people are telling stories, what I want to understand from you is how much that's changed things, mostly for geopolitical journalism. So bigger things. So the first thing is, what is the biggest conception you think audiences have about how geopolitical reporting actually works behind the scenes?
Well, firstly, in terms of ethics and neutrality, that was an interesting point that you raised, because in my time, and that again reveals my age, when we were studying or training to be journalists, the principle was that tell all sides of the story, be unbiased, don't be objective, don't bring your opinions into it. Make sure that the audience gets to hear every side of the story. There may not only be two sides, it might be three sides, it might be four sides. So bring out those layers, that nuance, and tell the story. I think today, however, a lot of that has changed. One is that you can see that everywhere opinion and subjectivity is very in your face. There's no such thing as neutral really anymore. But I also think that in today's times, when you can see a lot of stuff that is happening in front of you, which is just wrong. There are no two sides to some stories. There are no three sides to some stories. If somebody is lynched for what they're eating, then that's just wrong and needs to be condemned.
That's just fact, no sides.
Yeah. So I just feel that that kind of give all sides of the story reporting is irrelevant. And it's important for journalists to call it out and to call out what's going wrong. So whether it is in geopolitics, whether it is the way Israel bombed Gaza, the way Trump is doing his politics and his sort of bullying in the world, whether it is what happens in our own country. I gave the example of lynchings, etc. So it's our job to call it out. It's not, as there's a famous saying that if it's raining outside, I don't need you to tell me that it's raining outside,
Exactly.
Right? In the media. So I think that is a debate about neutrality that's gone. And in geopolitics as well, I think when reporters are writing or broadcasting about big geopolitical events, a lot of it is based on information and biases that your own home country will have towards the story, and that's natural. So, when I used to cover the foreign ministry for a very long time, so obviously I will look at things from India's perspective, Indian foreign policy perspective, with regard to a lot of stories. And I think we saw that even, like, for example, when the first Gulf War happened and there was a lot of debate about, how American journalists were embedded and just embedded with the American military. So it gave a sort of a very one-sided view of how things played out. So I think when it comes to geopolitics, there is a lot of that
to take into account as well.
Yeah, that depending on which country you belong to, there is an inherent bias that you may, or a perspective that you may bring to a story. It's not, I think, possible humanly to be completely objective.
Right.
That's just the reality of what it is.
Absolutely. And you cover a lot of unpredictable leaders, right? And when leaders behave in an unpredictable manner, what becomes harder for journalists who are also learning from you to verify? Is it the facts, the intent, or the consequences? What would you focus the most on when you're covering situations like that?
I think facts matter the most. And I think what I admire a lot about the American media, for all its faults and everything else, is that they're not afraid to call their president a liar.
Yes.
They're not afraid to fact check him. And that's very important. So as we're recording this, he's had a State of the Union address, his annual address to the US Congress. And I'm sure there are lots of falsehoods that he's made, which will be called out by the US media. And that, I think, is great, because they literally fact check him on every point that he makes whenever he speaks. So to be able to do that, to call out, to just state the facts is important. Unfortunately, in India, we don't have a media that is able to question those in power any longer with any spine. And as a result of that, the fact is that you have fact checkers who are so big in the media space today, whether it's Alt News, Zubair, or a Boom Live, who are actually doing the job that journalists should be doing, which is that every legacy media house should be checking facts. Why are you there, right?
Right.
But it is now a separate body of people, often working, with just 3 or 4 people amongst them, who are doing basic things like checking facts in real time. A photograph that's gone viral, a video that's gone viral, and saying that, no, this is not true, this is true. What is the reality of this? So that, I think, says a lot about the state of our media, when fact checkers have started, or have been for a while now, doing the job that mainstream journalists should be doing, or legacy journalists.
I completely agree with you. And I think you said somewhere recently something about how Trump talks to women and the female journalists that he had called out. And I think I also saw one girl where she was asking him something about the Epstein files, and he just looked straight at her and said, "I don't like your smile," or "Why are you not
should smile
smiling?
more."
You should smile more," or something like that. And I think what you're saying is exactly the idea that at least she was able to go there and question him. What he says in response is horrible. I mean, sure, but here even the space to do that doesn't exist.
But I think
right?
what was also disappointing about that is the lack of support she got from her other colleagues at that same, it was Caitlin Collins, I think, of CNN.
Yes.
And that was also called out, the fact that the other reporters on that beat were just like so quiet when she was sort of pushing back. But having said that, yes, she did push back, and he's a totally sort of different political animal to deal with. He's extremely offensive, and he finds his target is more often than not. We did an entire show on this on Decoder, where I work. Just on the way he targets women reporters in particular. Nothing gets under Trump's skin more than a woman reporter questioning him, and asking him uncomfortable questions that he doesn't want to answer. So then he'll say things like "Miss Piggy," which he did to one reporter, remember, on the plane. Yeah, exactly. And it's infuriating. And so it is, women reporters are his sort of big target when it comes to his misogyny, his anger. That nothing makes him angrier.
Why do you think so many people are still willing to live in delusion and tolerate him?
Ask the American voters. I mean, I was having a conversation just yesterday with a friend of mine, saying that it's really funny, because I was watching this America's Next Top Model documentary on Netflix. And this was one of those shows that when I was much younger, I did watch a few episodes of, and I didn't really get into it. But when I watched this documentary, I realized what a toxic show it was. And some conversation came up, and I said that, this whole reality TV culture that America spawned,
Absolutely.
that kind of the whole world got into, and so much of it is toxic, and what is wrong with people, and why did they sort of, there was literally a young woman on that show who was raped, who was sexually assaulted, and they filmed it. They didn't even stop it. The producers just filmed it, and even the documentary doesn't have the nerve to call it out as rape, which really infuriated me. So I was like, I just don't understand like how this show became such a hit for like nearly 25 years. And then I was like, well, it's somehow doesn't surprise me that then a reality TV star got elected president not once but twice.
Wow.
And it's not like the American people didn't know what it was like under Trump 1.0, but they went ahead and did it again. But having said that, I think there are a lot of warning signs, or there's a lot of messaging from the way Trump was elected that often people like us tend to sort of turn our noses away and say, this shouldn't have happened. The fact is, there is a fatigue with establishment all around the world. There is economies that are struggling, people are struggling. In America too, I think even amongst immigrants, illegal immigration was seen as a genuinely emotive issue because of rising prices, lack of job opportunities, etc. And because the establishment and the Democrats didn't really feel the pulse of the people, Trump was seen as an outsider who did kind of understand, ironically, even though he's a billionaire
For
and
the
whatever.
people.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that he kind of understood
Yeah.
that he would drain the swamp as he said he would, and that
Yeah.
he would challenge that in Washington insiders and the establishment, and that's something we've seen in many play out in many different countries as well. So I think there is very much a message for liberals, those more on the left of the political spectrum, to take away from this that. There's a reason why the Trumps of the world have got elected.
Right.
And they need to address those
Issues
issues
first.
directly too. Yeah.
Right. Right. And how do you personally distinguish between what you know, what you suspect, and what you're still verifying? And in these moments when information is incomplete, but there's this kind of pressure to publish something. I think I also read Faye D'Souza said somewhere that during Operation Sindoor or another time when she was reporting, people were getting angry because the news was everywhere else except on her channel. And then she would put it up an hour or an hour and a half later. And then she put up a little thing saying, hey, I'm going to take my time to check if I know that this has actually happened or not. I don't care who's posting how fast. So how do you take that into account? What do you decide what is responsible to report and what is not, and how fast that should happen?
So we were always taught in the NDTV of Pranoy and Radhika Roy, which was to make sure you're right and not first. And even when that meant that the channel competition was cutthroat, even if it meant you were second or third to put something on, it's important to get it on quickly, but it's important to verify everything that comes your way. And verification means it's either come from such a amazing top source like the Prime Minister himself that it's irrefutable and mera source Prime Minister hai, acha, put it on. Or it's somebody or it's a story that you've double sourced from two different authentic sources, and you tell your editor this is what it is, this is where it's come from, and you don't put it on until it's verified. And it's a very simple thing. People have been killed off on television news in India before they actually died by channels that were so quick to jump the gun. And what happens is one channel will say, oh, so-and-so has died. There's no official statement from the family or the hospital, but they'll say it, and the others just would pick it up and copy it.
Correct.
And then they had egg on their face because, they had to retract. So then we had a rule, for example, that if somebody's critically ill and there is a rumor that they may have died, until the family or the doctors put out a public statement, we will not carry it as sources. We will wait. And that's fine. You're talking about life and death. You can't just put half-baked stuff out there. So similarly, like Operation Sindoor is an interesting example you gave, because here you had a lot of stuff that was being put on air, which was just like a fantasy. It was just like videos which were literally video games, videos from some other conflict,
Yeah, yeah.
totally unverified.
Everything was happening that week.
Yeah, and claims
Yeah.
that were unverified. We captured Lahore, we captured Islamabad, we captured Karachi. And none of this was on the record. None of this was, and all turned out to be untrue. So I think that not only does damage to the credibility of the journalists that are putting this out, but it hurts the country.
And the army that's actually going out and doing those things.
Because when the government is trying to tell the world that, look, we were victims of this horrible terror attack, we reserve the right to retaliate, and this is what we have done. But if your media is going to put out false claims and highlight these fantasies and just fake stories and put out fake news, then the rest of the world doesn't take you as seriously.
No.
You're just undermining the effort of your own armed forces and what they're trying to achieve. So I think that was a really, really low point for the Indian media. I know a lot of stuff does come on background in this government in particular. They love the word sources, and I know where that comes from. There are often briefings that are held by the senior ministers themselves on background with journalists, but you can't quote the minister. So if it's coming from a source like a senior minister, I still understand. But this was like next level crazy.
Absolutely. If you had to tell anyone listening one thing that they should be more careful about when they're consuming information that is so vastly available, and how they should do it, kind of like a little test of good journalism, because like you said, the fact that social media is getting things to us faster doesn't change the fact that it still takes time to check a fact. All that's happened is that it's easier for everyone to now have an opinion and say things, which is great, but true journalism still needs to be protected in a way that I should know what to tune into and where to read my news. So what would you say is a little test somebody can do regardless of what side they've picked? How do they see news and think, okay, I'm okay to trust this maybe?
So that's a good question, because I think that it's become more and more difficult to, with so much, like you said, there's so much you consume on social media, digitals, newspapers, television. So how do you know that what you're reading or what you're listening to is fact? The thing is, you have to know the biases of the news organization that you are tuning into. It's a fact. Every organization, because of its ownership structure or whatever, will have it'll lean one way or another. And if you know that, that's important. Having knowledge is important. Having knowledge about ownership structures and the way an organization leans is important. Because honestly, I can predict very often when I pick up a particular newspaper all the channels are the same now anyway. They're all pro-government. So I really don't recommend watching television news. I hate to say this as someone who was in TV for nearly 25 years. But I just feel that television doesn't really add anything to your news experience, except when there's elections. But even for that now, frankly, there are alternatives. You don't have to watch TV for that, even for analysis. But I feel that make sure you're getting more than one source of news. So if you're choosing to read, let's say, the Hindu, do read the Times of India or the Hindustan Times as well. And I'm saying this very consciously because these are two very popular mainstream papers that do generally have a tilt which is pro-government. The Hindu is a sort of very old-fashioned, sometimes some would say boring, but it's okay. They're very old school. But you know that they're very old school, so they're not going to sensationalize stuff.
Correct. But they are not left. I always thought
I would say that they are more traditional. I mean, they get labeled left. But yeah, maybe a little more left of center than, say, other papers. So when you know that, if I'm reading this, the same story will be covered very differently by a Hindu than by a Times of India. You'll see that. It'll be very different in how they write it, where they place it. And even the Indian Express, which has generally been my favorite newspaper, you can see a lot of the biases now, the kind of columns that are written, the editorials. So you'll, cherry pick. So as long as you know, that these are my sources of information. And secondly, also don't believe everything you read.
Right.
Especially on social media and especially on WhatsApp. And this is to my parents, especially to my
And
mother.
every single human being I know.
But generally, because like in their WhatsApp groups, like, their cousins will put like random like stuff. Thankfully, they do. I think it's very important to call out stuff that is shit. I mean, am I allowed to say that?
Yes,
Yes. Okay,
absolutely.
great. If you know something is wrong, it's bullshit. It's just wrong. Just
Yeah.
say it's fake.
Yeah.
And you will be amazed that when people who put fake stuff in WhatsApp groups, when they're called out for it, how quickly they delete it. These are just little things that you can do.
Yeah.
So you can push back. I mean, I know somebody who put like some fake New York Times front page, and then my dad called it out. Yeah, and then he was so embarrassed. He just quickly deleted it and whatever.
WhatsApp University, it's called now.
That's it. So I'm just saying that please don't, like, one of my aunts is convinced 100 times that there was a cure for cancer through Ayurveda, and I had to tell her that no, this WhatsApp forward is not
true. But it keeps coming back.
But things will come back in different forms. So the thing is, just because it's on WhatsApp doesn't mean it's true. And now in the age of AI, it's so scary because even what you're seeing and listening to may not be real.
And half the time it's not.
Yeah. And the thing is that I think the more you are aware that, okay, I like the fact that on social media now, even when a video gets put out, which might seem a little off, people do ask, they ask AI only, is this real or is this AI generated? And you get to know straight away whether it's AI generated or not.
Correct.
So at least there is some pushback. So, asking those questions and asking yourself that, does this sound plausible? I mean, could this be? Let me just double check. And AI that way it's a double-edged sword, but it has made a lot of things easier. There are a lot of things that you can verify if you use it the right way, use the right prompts. I'm still getting used to it myself. It's both scary and useful.
Right. No, I completely agree. I think that's a very nice little test to do. Also to just read more of different kinds of things.
Yeah, read different kinds of
And then
news.
check,
It's like,
right.
even it's the British papers.
Right.
The Guardian is totally left. It's anti-establishment. It's anti-monarchy. So they would have covered the Andrew arrest in a particular way, on the Epstein story. The Telegraph is very right-wing, and it has a different way it looks at the monarchy. So there at least the newspapers declare their biases. They're very
Right.
clear who they endorse and who they don't. But if you read both the Guardian and the Telegraph and the Times, you're pretty much sorted in England. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So similarly, if you read the Hindu and you read the Times of India, the HT, I'm a multi-newspaper person. I know a lot of people are not. But our algorithms are also like that. Like, you click something on Instagram once,
Then you're done. It's over for you.
Yeah. Like the other day I clicked something random, like some emerald ring came up. Then my entire Instagram feed was emeralds. And I was like, no, I went and looked for golden retrievers again, which is my favorite thing to see online. So then I got
You
my dog.
fixed your feed.
I fixed my feed quickly, so the goldens were back. But X is the same. If you're not doing the following column and you get the For You column, if you click one thing, like let's say a story on Trump, your whole feed will be full of that same story on
But
Trump.
I can't look at him this much.
But it's there. That's
It's
how
exactly
these
the way it is.
algorithms work.
Right.
And then they just manipulate your feed in a way that's all you'll be bombarded with. So if you're aware of that and you know that and you know how you can fix that, then do it. That's
It's
important.
very important to not go down that little
It's
thing.
it's a rabbit hole.
No, I completely agree with you. And also, now that you have mentioned the Epstein files, there's nothing that... I mean, I'm going to ask you this question in two ways. I think the first is just, since you're covering a lot about the horrible way that this one leader is behaving erratically, Trump, right? And what is the role, according to you, of this nexus between the media, a government, other states, and how their reaction to something so horrific and obviously horrific could be, how much it affects these victims? And the second thing would be, if I come back closer home, and with what happened with the Unnao rape case recently, and I don't know if you've heard about Yogita Bhayana, the activist who's doing this brilliant work, and she's on a journey to just call out our Epstein files, right? She's saying that it's not such a faraway reality, come closer and check. I myself don't see anything being called out here, but I just want to hear from you, not just one pointed question, but about everything you feel to do with this, about the Epstein files, about Trump to do with this, about how states such as ours are responding to them or not responding to them, what that makes us look like, all of that.
Well, I mean, it's such a horrific story, and we know the details. In fact, I watched this old Epstein documentary again on Netflix
I
again,
also finished yesterday.
and it was just, it's really gut wrenching, when you watch it and you see and I mean, that's, and one good thing that that documentary did was that it gave, I think, the survivors an opportunity to really tell their stories, even though it had nothing new to say that we hadn't read about before. But when you hear them and you listen to them and they have that space to tell their stories, that's really important. What's interesting is that there are consequences. As we speak, people are being investigated in other countries. I mean, the fact that the king's brother got arrested is huge. The fact that the former UK ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson, was arrested. That is huge. In other countries, and other, you've seen lawyers having to step down from their positions. From various people have had to resign. The only country where there's really been no consequence, where this impact has been the most, has been America.
Right.
Where, I mean, a lot of people and in the media are asking, well, when will the accountability start here? In some ways, like the fact that Bill Gates had to drop out of speaking at the AI summit in Delhi.
What happened there? Because there was confusion.
There was confusion, but from what I understand, I think the government felt it was very awkward, because then the whole headline would have been about Bill Gates. Speaking, at this big event, and it kind of would overshadow what India was trying to showcase with this AI summit, and the whole thing becomes the controversy.
So that is the decision the government made.
I don't know that for sure, but that is the impression I got from talking to a few people, that this was just not, it just became like too controversial. But my point is that who is really being then held accountable in the US? That is a big question mark. As far as the way the media here generally covers cases of sexual assault, etc. Well, I was there when this whole Nirbhaya gang rape happened in Delhi. I think it was 2016, if I'm not mistaken. And I had never till then seen any story of sexual assault make such huge headlines. It's not that
it doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen, or it hasn't happened since then. But this story was front page every day.
What do you think was different?
And I'll tell you. And it was television that largely forced the newspapers to take note as well. Television we were like relentless. It was like our headline for 2 months. I think, and this is the honest truth, the fact that it happened to a young woman who was living in Delhi, a young professional, went to like Select City Walk Mall to watch a movie with her friend. She could have been any one of us. And
that's what got to people.
I think that the fact that it was so close to home, and that it was more, it's a very rude reality of the times we live in. And and of course the brutality of it and how horrific the whole thing was. So I think that that's what captured the media's attention, and then it became like this relentless sort of campaign. Whereas when you look at cases that have, come to light in the 10 years after that, there have been so many horrific cases that, but they just don't make the same kind of headlines. Because I just think that when it happens in some village in UP or in Unnao or anywhere, it might be a headline for a few days, but it just falls off the map.
The distant reality for...
because the media is, either in Delhi or in Bombay, and when it happens out of their sort of sphere of interest or geography, then it doesn't resonate the same way for some reason. I don't think that's right, but I just think that's the reality of the media world that we live in.
It's true. That's a lot to take in. And I think, thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you very much for having me.